Hello and welcome to another episode of the Solo Inter podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things Inter. Today we are joined by another special guest who has his work published on a lot of popular websites, Football Italia, Get Italian Football News, Calciomercato. It's none other than Kaustubh Pandey. Hey man, Kaustubh, how are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you guys? I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you, Kaustubh. And, of course, the last weekend, Inter back their sixth consecutive win against Spezia. And the run has been going, ever since Inter crashed out of the Champions League. And Inter are only 1 point behind AC Milan now. And it's a very competitive Scudetto race. So, of course, we have Kaustubh here today, joining us to talk about a lot of things, Serie A, Inter, and to, of course, preview the Hellas Verona match, which, in my opinion, is going to be one of the toughest. So, to get into the thick of things, I'll just quickly shift to Manish, who's also our regular on, who's a regular on the podcast. Manish, I just want to get your thoughts quickly on the Spezia match. Just to review it. What did you think? It wasn't as easy as it seemed. Like many people thought, just because Spezia was sitting 16th on the table, we should be winning like 4-0, 5-0 or something. But having watched Spezia quite a few times this season, I personally, as I said in the previewing the match, I never thought it was going to be an easy one. And the first half, was 0-0, and we did take our time to break them down. So, what is your quick take on the match? Who do you think stood up, and who was crucial to this match?
Yes, first of all, good evening to all Inter fans worldwide and watching us all around the world. And thank you, Costa, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on a show. So, Parmesh, talking about your question, yes, like I said in the preview of the previous game, this game, it's a very serious match against Spezia. And a lot of fans I saw all around the world saying that, you know what, this is a weaker team. We can rest our star players. We can give, I think, all new 11. I was surprised to see a lot of fans say that, like just start all the new 11 and rest all the main players, because this match we're going to win easily 3-0, 4-0. But I was glad Conte didn't rest much. He stuck to his strongest 11 because he treated this match equally as important as playing any other opposition. And yes, it was a very, very challenging match. It was really, because I was surprised to see that. I also pointed out last week that we used our three centre backs 7 consecutive matches. And against Spezia, it was the 8th match where the 3 of them started together. So all in all, it was really a tough. You could see that the first half was quite lackluster because Spezia and Inter both were like battling it out in midfield. Didn't have much chances. I think we had one brilliant move by Ashley Young on the left flank. He back in the Aston Villa days where he played as a midfielder. He tried one of those silky moves. You might see that very rarely, but it was one of those, and very good save by the keeper. Other than that, I think Lautaro Martinez missed out an open header, which is quite common these days. Him missing crucial chances, it's happening now time and time again. Second half started well. Brilliant goal scored by Ashraf Hakimi. And the stats say that. I think he is the youngest defender below the age 22 who scored 4 goals in the league in just 13 matches. So brilliant. It was a pure striker's finish. He took the ball. His first touch, I thought it was quite bad, but he had the pace to make up for it. And he gave a very good angle drive and scored a brilliant, brilliant goal. Also, the penalty which Lukaku scored, man, this guy seems to be touch wood. Yeah, he's been scoring penalties for us. We haven't seen him missing penalties. It's although last season, I think there was a bit of tussle where there's confusion who kicks the penalty. It was all distributed: Lukaku, Lautaro, Sanchez, Esposito. I don't know who all had taken the penalties. But this season, I'm so happy that Conte decided like Lukaku, just he's the main kicker. All in all, it was a really tough match, a hard-fought victory. And I think the moment they scored in the end, and we all realized that, concentration has to be for 95 minutes, not just in the 90th minute and game over. And I think they scored in the last kick of the match. So all in all, concentration should be throughout. A brilliant performance. It's a 6th straight victory, if I'm mistaken, right, Parmeshwar? Yeah, 6th straight victory and very good result. So looking forward for the 10th straight victory for my end.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with you on everything, Manish. It was a hard fought when we had to fight for it. And I personally never underestimated Spezia. Kudos to the way they played at the Meazza. And just to add on again, Barella, top notch performance. I mean, this guy being partially fit, in some of the matches, this guy is just unstoppable. And kudos to Ashley Young. I know it even though you may say it's Spezia, it wasn't an easy game, and I think he did a good job. So hopefully he can bounce back from the rough patch. So moving on, Kaustubh, I wanna of course get onto things with you now. So to begin with, of course, I want to talk a bit about Inter. So what I want to first ask you is, Inter season began out on a very, let's say, rough note, if you will. I know that you have a soft spot for Fiorentina, and that first game was bonkers. Yeah, we won 4-3. Whatnot. That game was crazy. But since then, this pattern emerged where Inter were conceding way too many goals. Playing 3-4-1-2, trying to accommodate Christian Eriksen, which I will ask you about later. But yeah, since then, after the draw with Lazio, we lost to Milan after 4 years. We drew to Mönchengladbach. The only team we beat was Genoa. The form was very bad, and only now after crashing out from the UCL is when we've properly bounced back. So, what do you make of it all? Like, what's your take on this? Like, do you think Inter can keep this going now that there is no other distraction?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of expected this sort of a start to the season, considering the sort of players that Conte brought in, and that's not exactly a criticism for the way Conte likes to do business. I mean, when Kolarov started, I mean, he was pretty bad in the first few games in the Champions League and Serie A. And he's now been dropped. So I think Vidal's been the sort of signing who plays well for 30 minutes, then he gives away gives away 2 goals in the next 15 minutes, be it in Champions League or Serie A. I mean, these were Conte signings that many Inter fans didn't quite fancy. They wanted guys like Tonali and Kumbula. But I think when Conte's constant cribbing has stopped, I mean, he's pretty well known for it. But just when that sort of stopped, and I think Conte, one thing which is pretty good about Conte, which he's shown historically, is that when he's not got any European distractions or distractions of maybe another competition or a cup competition, that's when he's at his best. We saw it at Chelsea, where they finished 10th before Conte came in. And when he came in, he won them the Premier League when there was no exertion of the Champions League or the Europa League. So I think it's actually a huge advantage for Inter, because I can't quite think of many managers out there who can maybe do well in the league as well as Conte can after he's been knocked out of Europe. I think that's one of his faults, in the sense that he constantly rotated the team, and a lot of rotations were wrong, because I think that right hand side with Damian and Hakimi, I think that's where he kind of struggled early on. Like, I think Damian is the sort of player who's made for the big games. I mean, we saw it regularly at Man United, and then Parma. Let's forget Parma. But then he's come in at it. He's been pretty good in a lot of important games. But Conte has sort of taken a while to figure out how Hakimi really likes to play, because at Dortmund, Lucien Favre liked to play a very expansive brand of football. He constantly combined with Jadon Sancho on that wing, almost like a winger with Sancho slightly inside. So I think he took a while to understand exactly the sort of player Hakimi is, because I think Hakimi, to be honest, isn't exactly great at 101 defending. Damian is very good, and that's one thing which he's now starting to figure out when he played Damian against Gladbach, which I think was pretty much the right decision. And you talked about that Fiorentina game. The changes that he made in the second half were, I mean, they completely changed the game. So I think he just was going through this period where he wanted to experiment and just see how the team really wants to be. He even played Nainggolan in that game, and he played pretty well. Vidal came off from the bench. So I think a bit of that is expected, especially when you bring new players in, and especially when Conte was trying to accommodate Eriksen in when uh, it was a slight deviation from the normal system, and Eriksen doesn't seem to be fitting that system. So I think it was pretty expected, but over a period of time, he's figured out what his first team really is. And I think there was this brief period when Brozovic was out injured, and that was when Inter dropped points. And I think when Brozovic plays regularly, I think that's when Inter really are on a consistent run of form, because I'm a big fan of defensive midfielders, by the way. But I think when Brozovic plays regularly, Inter will win more games. And if he figures out that right wing problem, I think with European exertions out of the way, I think Inter can go all the way. And I think for the left side, I thought it was more of a problem when Biragi was there, because I've seen enough of Biragi, but as much of a great crosser that he is, he was probably the most creative wingback last season. But he's not athletic at all. He can't defend. He makes defensive errors. So I think that's been fixed this season as well. So I think with no European football, I think Inter can really go all the way.
Perfect, Kaustubh. So I just want to ask you one question. Like, if you had to sum up Inter's Champions League so far, how they performed in Champions League, I know it's been the history records, like first time Inter's been out all of Europe. But do you think it's a good thing? And how do you sum up overall Inter's Champions League, the performance?
I think if I pretend to be an Inter fan here, I mean, it just takes away a bit of pain. I mean, if Inter had been knocked out of the Champions League in the quarterfinal, it would have been more painful for you guys. And I don't think Conte can take a European team in the Champions League too. He can't take a team too far in the Champions League, so it just saved some of the pain for you guys. And he's probably a pragmatist who loves to do things his own way. So I think from Conte's perspective, it suits him a lot more. I mean, in terms of how we talk about this prestige issue where Inter should be playing in the Champions League, I mean, the group that Inter were in isn't an easy group to go through. I mean, Gladbach are doing pretty well in Bundesliga. Marco Rosa is a brilliant manager. I mean, I know Real are pretty inconsistent. They were inconsistent at that point in the league and in the Champions League. But I think it was pretty a case of very minor things going their way and some minor things going the other way, because no one really expected Shakhtar to do as well as they did. I mean, they weren't as good in the Europa League semi-final last season, but this season all of a sudden they've been so good, even up with all their players are due to COVID stuff and whatnot. So I think if Shakhtar hadn't really kicked on from what they was last season, I mean, Inter could have easily progressed. But yeah, I think it won't make too much of a difference if Inter go on and win the league. So I think it's a big advantage in that sense, because you look at Juve and then you look at Milan there, then you got Napoli. All of them are playing in Europe, and even Atlanta are doing it. So I think just about every single team that you expect out of the top to finish inside the top six are playing in Europe. So I think Conte will be pleased with that, just like maybe someone like Mourinho will be.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting take, and yeah, I do find myself agreeing with a lot of points you made, Kaustubh. So to move on, I just wanted to ask you a bit about Inter's players in general. Like, I'll leave it up to you. Who do I just want you to maybe pick, let's say, two or three players and, analyze their form and let's say talk about bit about their growth and who you personally feel can go on to become a star for years to come. And I'll also cap this question off by saying, of course, Handanovic's position as the captain and as the first choice keeper is still sort of a doubt, especially next season onwards, since we have shortlisted a lot of keepers, Cranio, Musso, Silvestri. So who do you think going forward in the years to come should replace Handanovic as the captain? And Manish, the captain bit is also for you to answer, like, because this will be a big thing next season. This will be very important because Handanovic, who had like probably was just made the captain after Icardi, and that was at mid-season of 18-19. So yeah, what is your take on that, Kaustubh, to begin with?
I think for the goalkeeping bit, I mean, from a statistical point of view, since I love the statistical part, I think for me, I think Silvestri is a decent goalkeeper. He's not someone who is as good as maybe Canio or Juan Musso, because going by the post shot XG stat, which basically allows us to show how good shot stoppers are or how good goalkeepers are in terms of shot stopping. I think Silvestri is just about doing average, in the sense that he's conceding just as many goals as he's expected to. For Verona, when you look at Musso or Alessio Cranio, I think they are the only two goalkeepers who've constantly overperformed on that metric, which shows that they are very good, consistent shot stoppers. But I mean, for me, I think Musso is a shade better than Cranio, because he's a bit more complete than Cranio. He's as good a shot stopper, but he's a bit better on the ball. He's got more of that leadership about him, that sort of thing is important for a goalkeeper these days, especially when you're playing in a slightly complex or a bit of a lopsided system sometimes. But I mean, Inter can look at uh, players in Italy, and I think there's better options abroad, because I mean, if Inter go out there and maybe look at a keeper in maybe Portugal or somewhere, because Portugal these days has become a place where clubs are really looking at talent. You look at any club in the world, they will look at Portugal and say, we want to get players from there. So I think Inter should look at maybe countries like France and then Portugal, because the value for money out there is much, much better than the value for money that you get in Germany, England, or maybe even Italy. So I think if they don't get maybe Musa or Canio, I think it won't be the end of the world. When it comes to the players I expect to do very, very well in the next some years, I think Barella is probably going to be one of the best midfielders in the world for me at maybe next year or maybe in the next 2 years. Because you look at, I mean, I remember writing about him back in 2017 when he was at Cagliari. I thought that this guy not just covers a lot of ground, he's someone who's very, very versatile in his approach. And it now shines through. Like you can't really point your finger out and say that this guy can be a box to box midfielder, or he can play as that number 10 role or the advanced midfielder, because he's someone who covers all those positions, and almost like Stefano Sensi can sometimes, but we know how injured he is. But you look at a player like Barella and say, I mean, he's someone who's almost a captain material sort of player who fans can really connect with sometimes. Because I mean, the recent game against Cagliari, you saw him getting beaten up about thrice. His cheek was as red as an apple or something. I mean, he went down about 3 times. He was constantly beaten up, and every single time he got up and he contributed to those goals as well. So I think it just shows the sort of player he is. And secondly, I'll say Bastoni. I mean, largely because I think a lot of it is down to the fact that left-footed centre backs these days are very, very rare in the market. I mean, you look at a lot of clubs out there who will look for that position because of how good they are when it comes to allowing teams to progress in possession. Like the passing angles that a left-footed centre back makes is slowly becoming so important for modern day teams. I know Conte's system is a bit different. It isn't as based on possession as someone like Marco Rosa, for example. But having if Conte is playing a 3-5-2, or if a future Inter manager comes in, I think the game is going towards a stage where a 3-4-3 or 3-5-2 or maybe a 3-4-1-2, all these back three shapes will be very, very important. So I think in Bastoni, Inter have got a player who's very, very progressive on the ball, statistically and even otherwise. You can see it. And you could easily look at it last season when there was a period of time after lockdown when Conte really wanted his wide centre backs to overlap, almost be like Atalanta, Skriniar and Bastoni were asked to do all this sort of things. But I think Bastoni really thrived on that. Skriniar was good on the ball, but he left a lot of space behind him, and that's where his real weakness came in. But Bastoni is someone who is almost like a left back who, I mean, his development has been such that he sometimes looks like a left back who can carry the ball, but his original position is a centre back. That's the real hallmark of ball playing left-footed centre back, and that's another sort of position that I've grown to love because of how it just adapts to the modern day basics of football, basically. So I think these are the two players, and apart from him, I think I'll look at that Inter team and see maybe Stefan De Vrij is there, but I think he is signing a new contract. But apart from, I think Skriniar is there, but I don't quite see him staying for too long. In the sense that, I mean, I know he's been pretty good this season, better than last season at least. But I mean, you don't quite see him still being the sort of centre back that Conte needs. He's not as complete as maybe Bastoni or De Vrij. I mean, De Vrij is carrying the ball more often this season, but as good as Skriniar is, I mean, he can go and play in any other team in the Premier League, or maybe in Spain, play for Real Madrid or Barcelona or Atletico Madrid. He can play there without too much of a fuss, and I think that really plays on their mind. So I think Bastoni and Barella are probably the most obvious players who I think will probably be one of the best in their roles in the next 2 or 3 seasons or years.
Just to quickly touch upon with you, Manish, and then back to you, Kaustubh. As I address the question, who do you guys think should lead into next season onwards? Because Handanovic probably not being the captain is like, let's say, a 95% guarantee of sorts, because we are really desperate for a new keeper. And I have a feeling that as soon as we get a new keeper, I have a feeling Handanovic would get benched. So Manish, to begin with you first, and then to you, Kaustubh, who do you guys would like to see as the captain? Let's say, if not in realistic terms, but like, yeah, who do you think should be the captain, inter captain next season?
See, if you ask me, I think Inter, over the generations we have seen, is the oldest player in the club. The oldest player, as in not longest serving player at the club, I would put it that way, is the natural progression of the captain, which I pretty much don't agree with it. I think a captain should need personality, should have charisma, should have the leadership qualities. So Handanovic has been at the club the longest time at this point, hence he has got the captaincy band. But saying that, if you ask me personally, I would think some person who has the leadership quality, who drags his team forward, that would be none other than Lukaku. Because Lukaku at this stage, he has a lot of experience. He has been playing for a lot of teams around in Europe. He's also one of Belgium's leading top scorers. So he has the appeal, international appeal. Yes, he also. I've seen last 2 seasons the way he's carrying the team forward, the way he's instructing his team members. Although he's not the captain, he is playing indirectly a role of a captain, and you can see that. So if you ask me personally, I would think Lukaku would make an ideal captain. But knowing as per the club structure, I think after Handanovic would be someone like Brozovic or Skriniar, as per the longest time at the club. So that's my take on it, Parmeshwar, if you ask me.
Kaustubh, what about you? What do you think? Who should be the next inter captain? Your opinion?
I mean, I was going to say Lukaku as well, largely because in a lot of ways, I think Mourinho and Conte are similar in the sort of, they want a lot of players who've got this leadership in them. And when Mourinho signed Lukaku at Man United, I mean, he didn't quite fancy him as much as he fancied Morata, but he just wanted him on the pitch, not just because of the goals that he brought to the team. He wanted him on the pitch because he was a leader. I mean, people made fun of a lot of things which was pretty bad on their part. And I think Lukaku deserved more credit for what he did at United. And there were a lot of games at United, and they've been at Inter as well, when you see him, it seems as if where he just wants the team to win more than anyone else. I think there was a game for Man United which Lukaku was playing. I think it was that Sevilla game where United lost and got knocked out. I think Lukaku was the only player who really wanted to win the game. He was the only player who seemed urgent, and he seemed really hungry to for United to score, and which United nearly scored in the end. I mean, I think he was the only goal scorer in that game as well. I think, and coming to Lukaku's role in the team, I think it's almost a myth that Lukaku has become a pure goal scorer, because going by numbers, he's actually Inter's best creative outlet this season. So it just says a lot about him, in the sense that Martinez has been a bit inconsistent this season, but Lukaku has almost done this dual role this season, where he's almost, I think, not just a dual role. It's a role where he's meant to do three roles. Like, one's the leadership, because he's probably the most marketable player on that team because of how popular he is, and he's one of the most, let's say, top 5, top 6 strikers in the world easily. And he's got the goal scoring role in him, and he's got the creation role in him as well. So I think he's almost carrying a lot of burden, and he's doing it excellently. Like, you see, um, Mkhitaryan at Roma, he's someone who's carrying that team. You look at Ronaldo, without Ronaldo, Juventus will probably be 5th or 6th around that position. You look at Milan with Zlatan. I think Lukaku is a similar sort of personality. So I think, as much as Inter won't make him captain next season, I think it will be Brozovic. I think Lukaku will probably be my pick as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting take by Manish and Costa, both of you. And if I just had to quickly touch upon it, I personally feel it should be Lukaku as well. I mean, you all just summed up the reason. I don't need to delve into that, but I have a feeling, as Costa, you capped off by saying it could end up being Brozovic. I hope it is Lukaku, but maybe it'll end up being Brozovic. But on that note, Costa, let's move on to the preview for the Hellas Verona match, because you know in Serie A, you have a lot of tricky teams, in my opinion, at least in the past few years. And the team that one of the teams I love to watch and has caught my eye personally is Hellas Verona, especially last season. They had just come up, they had just been promoted last season. They did such a fantastic job, And even after losing, so many players this season, Sofian Amrabat, Marash Kumbula, Amir Ramani, they're going strong. They don't want to back down. I know they drew to Fiorentina, they dropped points to Sampdoria, but against the big guns, they've been, performing really well. So to just begin our preview for the Hellas Verona Inter match, I just want to ask you, what's your take on Ivan Juric? First things first, his tactical approach, how he's inculcated the level of discipline into the 11, his 3-4-2-1, his a few key players, if you would want to touch upon at Hellas Verona in that starting 11, and they were also hit by COVID and injuries, yet they managed to do well. Like, what is it about them? And also, as I said, they've missed out on they've let go of the likes of Kumbula. You Amrabat was so crucial last season, and you following Fiorentina yourself, he's not been the same this time around. So what is your take on Hellas Verona as a whole, considering all these factors? And also, how do you see them lining up, tactically? I mean, like, just to look at the tactical side of thing as well. So what do you think of Hellas Verona on a whole?
I think, starting with Ivan Juric, we know that, of course, he was playing under Gasperini at Genoa back in 2005 or 6, whatever that period was. So I think he's just inculcated a similar sort of spirit in a defensive sense into this Verona team. I mean, they're not expansive goal scorers like Atlanta are, but I mean, Gasperini likes his team to use the method of organized chaos in an attacking manner. Juric wants to use the methods of organized chaos in a defensive manner, where, I mean, what Verona really specialize in is not allowing the opposition to get shots away. It was the case last season, and to an extent, it's been the case this season. Like, they rely a lot on wide pressing. Like, they don't really want the opposition to play through the midfield, so they, especially in advanced areas, they sort of press really high up the pitch. In wide areas, in central areas, they sort of back off. And when they start to drop off, and when the opposition start to progress, they sort of sit in a narrow shape and don't allow the opposition to play through the middle. And a lot of times they try to get the opposition into one-on-ones when in their back three. But as soon as the ball reaches their defensive phase, I mean, they're probably the quickest team in the league when it comes to their attacking players. Their attacking players are very, very quick to track back. I think they are the quickest team in that regard. I'm not talking about stats in this case. I mean, it's more of a natural observation. Like, you look at players like Faraoni, even Zakani, but even Barak tracks back a lot, even when he's playing as a number 10. You don't quite see a lot of Italian teams do this, especially at this point. I mean, and it also comes down to how Juric isn't a manager who likes to play a proper number nine. He did try Kalinic, and I never thought I'll say this, that Kalinic did pretty well for them at this point, at one point earlier in the season, but I don't think he's the sort of player who is going to play too much for them this season, because Juric is the sort of manager who doesn't like proper number nines. I think he played Valerio Vere last season almost as a false nine. De Carmine played there, didn't quite score too many goals. I think De Carmine scored one goal in the first half of the season. That came against Fiorentina, of course. But they're the sort of team who really, I mean, their attacking players are very quick to get back, and if a team is, say, using an overlapping system like Atalanta do, they'll make sure that they have a spare man in that part of the pitch to make sure that they don't have an extra man there, because that's what the system is. They can have a lot of players in defensive position and they break very quickly. Like, I'm not quite sure about how their attacking has been this season, because they lost Amrabat. I mean, Amrabat was a player who was really good at breaking through the central lines of the opposition. They don't quite have that this season. And Miguel Veloso, I think Veloso hasn't quite played regularly this season. He's played about 7 games, and he's been a bit injury prone this season, when he was probably, for me, their most underrated player last season, and in a way he was their best player as well. So I think him not playing and the loss of Amrabat has sort of damaged their attacking output. And talking a bit statistically, I remember checking their stats out about 3 or 4 days ago, that going by expected goals, they've underperformed by about 6, and going by expected goals against, they've also underperformed by 7. So it's a bit of a dilemma. Like, you don't really know where they should finish, but since their underperformance in both the metrics is quite the same, so I think they'll finish around 9th. But there's still a lot of holes in this team that you didn't quite see last season. But I think, they lost Amrabat, I think, but they lost Kumbula as well, and all the players that they lost. I think the way that they've played this season has not been about reliance on individual players. It's more down to the effort of the whole team. Unlike last season, where you saw Kumbula progressing the ball a lot, you don't quite see this season from maybe Matteo Lovato or the Fiorentina guy Ceccherini. You don't quite see it from these players. I mean, it's been a bit different this season, as in they don't quite have the same sort of identity, even though they're trying to do it. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag this season, but I still think they are pretty good enough for a lower half finish in the upper half. I mean, in the 9th position or the 10th position, they are pretty much good value for money for that spot.
Of course, Kaustubh, you looked at a lot of the tactical aspect of how Hellas Verona play and how where you think they would finish, and a lot of their key players. Just to add to that, yeah, you did make a good point. That a lot of their strikers aren't making as much of a contribution, because, of course, they use them as a false nine. And one of our academy players, Eddie Salcedo, is right now playing that role over Nikola Kalinic, since Kalinic is injured. But just to look at, you know their, let's say, because I personally feel, the amount of the amount of players they've lost, it's been striking, and Ivan Juric personally has complained a lot this season about the Mercato they have had. He's not really been impressed by it. He's always tried to probably take shots at the management, saying, I wanted this player, I wanted that player. So what's your take on it? Do Hellas Verona really need what need to meet his demands with the way they're playing right now? Or like, do you think, Juric is probably just looking for an excuse maybe because they don't seem to be doing too badly. But maybe Juric is making a point because if maybe he does get a few upgrades, he could end up fighting for the Europa League spot. So what's your take on that?
I think statistically, I think they are the teams which has made the most individual errors leading to goal this season, which I think is 9 or 10, which is quite a lot. So I think that's a lot of that is has led to their underperformance in terms of the expected goals against metric. It shows that I think as much as I rate Matteo Lovato pretty highly, I think he's made the most number of individual errors in that team. So I think, and I think he is being seen as a successor to Kumbula, of course, and maybe to Rahmani as well. I think there are some areas where he needs to iron out, and then I don't think personally, since I've seen Ceccherini quite a lot at Fiorentina, I don't think he's the sort of player who's gonna play every single game at a consistent level for a club that finishes inside the top half of the table. And I think so that's where they really need another center back in. And I think Koray Gunter hasn't exactly been great either, I think he was pretty good last season. So I think it's been a case of individual errors, and as I just pointed out, that a lot of their progression from midfield isn't exactly as excellent as last season. They need a ball carrier in there. I mean, the players that they have in there right now, Ronaldo Vieira isn't exactly that sort of a player, neither is Ivan Ilic. I think they do need a midfielder who can go past people from the central midfield position. I think Juric probably needs a player like that, and maybe another centre back, not necessarily to maybe replace Kumbula, because they have a player who can be similar to him and Lovato, but I think a more of a left-sided centre back in place of Ceccherini when he goes back to Fiorentina. I think he's been pretty right to say that he needs, let's say, upgrades on the current bunch of players.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting take because yeah, I mean you see this recent improvement in Ivan Juric for quite some time, and you touched upon how he was under Gasperini, and just to add an interesting point, when Gasperini coached Inter, he was also at the coaching staff with Gasperini.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean you could see the similarities, and maybe if you give this guy upgrades, Hellas Verona can go places. That's pretty spot on. So on that note, I want to ask Kaustubh, Manish to begin with first, and then on to you, Kaustubh, because I personally feel this game is definitely going to be one of the toughest games for Inter, both home and away. Not just away during the weekend, but whenever we play them at home next year. This fixture as a whole, in my opinion, is going to be really tough because they've, as I pointed out, Kaustubh, they've held Juve away from home. They beat Lazio away from home. Yes, Lazio weren't in great form, but they held the unbeaten AC Milan. So there's been a lot to it. So Manish, to begin with you first, I want you to say why, like maybe give a few words on why, this can potentially be one of the toughest mid-table games, mid-table teams to face, or maybe you feel, you have a different perspective and maybe they aren't as tough to beat as per you. But yes, give me your thoughts and then maybe Kaustubh can add on to that. Yeah.
Yes, so you mentioned the clubs who they've held. They drew with Juventus, drew with the AC Milan. They beat Lazio. Also, you missed out. They drew with Atlanta, high-scoring Atlanta. And if you check the stats, like Kaustubh says, the stats speak a lot. The goals allowed are just 12 goals this season. That is second best in the league after Juventus. So although the personal mistakes, like Kaustubh pointed out, they have a lot of individual errors which led to the goals, but generally the goals which they allow is still second best in the league. So it's going to be challenging for us. And not to mention, there are three former Inter players in the team right now. Like one is Faroni, a youth player at Inter. He's in the right wing position. There's Di Marco, who pretty much got a reserve status at Inter, but whenever he plays against us, he turns into a prime Roberto Carlos, where he's going to shoot in left-footed long-range drives. Also, he'll take all the set pieces, so watch out for that. Also, there is a young youth player, Eddie Salcedo, which Inter rate highly. So he's on a dry loan, I believe. So these are the players who tend to show the club, the parent club, what they belong. Not much of Faroni, but yes, I'm a little worried about Di Marco and Salcedo. So generally, they also have Miguel Veloso, who is a very experienced player. He's again good at set pieces and distribution, ball distribution. So this match, yes, is going to be tricky for us. One that we have been playing a lot of games. We haven't rested much of our star men. People like Barella, people like Lukaku, and a back three are pretty much playing 5 or 6, 7 straight games one after other. So there's hardly been like a rest period of 2 or 3 days. And we're playing them away. Not that the away game matters much now, but then, yes, it's going to be really tricky. I expect it's going to be more like a chess match, this one, because Inter struggled over the last 2 or 3 matches. If Inter, what do you say, they just somehow churned out the results. Inter haven't been convincingly playing that well the last 2 or 3 games, but we're getting out the good results. But this game is going to be a real test for Conti, and let's hope it's Inter gets the victory. So I'm a bit skeptical with this match, like you, Parmeshwar. That's my take.
Yeah, just to point something out, actually, they actually did end up beating Atalanta, not a draw. They did beat Atalanta 2-0. So, but just before I move on to you, Kostub, Hellas Verona last season also, I mean, of course, things are different now, but when we played them away to it was actually Faraoni who completely destroyed Skriniar in the first 5 minutes, I remember. And even at the Miazza, they gave us a tough time. So, as Manish pointed out, and you, of course, analyzed upon, like, why, I just want to get your take on why this could potentially be tougher, and why this could be one of the toughest games, apart from facing someone like, let's say, Atalanta as a whole. Maybe we did draw Atalanta, but I personally feel somewhere down the line this game is going to be something really tough. So what's your take on it?
I think, firstly, I think Inter really sort of find it tough against teams that pack themselves centrally and push teams that push Inter wide, just use their wing backs and not allow them to use maybe the central midfield, and not allow them to use the passing option for Barella or maybe for Gagliardini as well. So I think Verona are one of the best teams in the league for forcing the opposition to do just that. And I think which I think Manish just pointed out for Faraoni and DiMarco. I think both of them have been their standout players this season, especially DiMarco. So I think that's I think he'll probably come up with a good performance like Jan Caramo had last season against for Parma against Inter. Sorry, I think I think he's their highest assister at this point, maybe 3 assists or maybe 4 assists. But I think Conte has to get that right side right in this game, because that's where DiMarco will play, of course. But if Conte has to get something out of this, he has to start Hakimi there, and it could be the game where Christian Eriksen really contributes, because he's the sort of player who knows how to manipulate these tight spaces. And if you just need one pointed pass for him to really pick out that final ball for the forward players, and that's what Verona don't really want the opposition to do, because that's how their playing style is. But Conte is someone who's Eriksen is someone who really knows the art of picking out those passes in the tight spaces. Inter really need that, because um, they don't quite have a player like that. I know Sensi can do that, but we know what Sensi is and how injured he is and how often he plays. So I think Hakimi needs to start on the right, and especially because Damian is meant for the big games. And so I think it will be, as you said, I agree with you when you say that it will be one of the toughest games, considering the fact that Inter have struggled against teams that um, sit back, clog the center of the pitch like Cagliari did, or maybe like Torino did, and Inter had to come back from a goal down and do that. I think it will be a similar game where Verona maybe just nick a goal from somewhere, where a goal maybe that they didn't deserve or stuff like that, and then Inter come back and maybe win 2-1 or 3-1. I think that is what's going to happen, but it will be a really stiff game.
So moving on, of course, we dissected as to how tough this is going to be. And at the same time, AC Milan faced Lazio over the weekend. So for Inter, it's like this, because AC Milan are going to have a significant number of absentees going into facing when as they go to face Lazio, Kessie, Ibra. But even without them, they managed to find their way. But this is important for Inter. Maybe if Inter also drop points, Juventus could be the ones benefiting from all this. But coming back to things, Kaustubh, maybe Manish, I remember, I think you had a few things to ask him about the Mercato, and also maybe you can ask him, about the Eriksen saga, the Mercato in general. So yeah, you can take
Yes,
over.
yes. So, Kaustubh, bringing back to the winter transfer market, it's a lifeline for a lot of clubs. And for us, normally December, January, over the last 4 or 5 years have been really challenging. And we always look for hope in the Mercato. So this time I want to ask you, what do you think Inter has to do in the January transfer market from the players they linked? And what's your opinion? Who are the players we should sign?
I think Ericsson needs to be moved out and Rodrigo De Paul needs to be signed ASAP, firstly, because I'm pretty tired of seeing Rodrigo De Paul play for Udinese and then help them fight relegation and then maybe finish 13th or 14th every single season. And in a way, he's probably the league's most complete midfielder as well. I know people go on about how creative he is and how much chances he creates for maybe Okaka or Lasagna. I mean, but there's a lot more to that player than just creating chances, and that's where Inter should really look at, because Conte needs a player who can work hard off the ball as well instead of just making those killer passes in the final third. De Paul does all of the things that Conte really wants a proper advanced midfielder to do, and which Ericsson can't do basically. And Sensi, we know Sensi. I've spoken about it 3 times now. So I think fixing that midfield, and I think one another area where Inter maybe need to fix as well is the defensive midfield area, because I don't think there's a player in there who can sort of do the job that Brozovic does. I've previously spoken how big a fan I am of defensive midfielders. I think Brozovic is one player that Inter really need to keep if they are to do anything, because it's having a player like Brozovic is very rare, because you look at every club in Europe, they want a defensive midfield player who can shield the back line, who can progress the ball, who can break down opposition lines. So I think when Brozovic doesn't play, we saw how Inter struggled, how inconsistent they were in Europe and in the league. And a lot of fans wanted Tonali. Tonali never came. Vidal came. Vidal isn't a defensive midfielder. And Gagliardini, I don't know what he is basically. Barella can't quite do that job as good as Brozovic can. So I think signing a defensive midfielder should also be a priority. I mean, if not this in the winter transfer window, then maybe in the summer.
So we also linked with players like Emerson Palmieri, Oliver Giroud, and what's your take on that? Will these players help with any case? Also, a lot of departures are linked with Nainggolan leaving, Perisic possibly leaving, Eriksen leaving. So all in all, it's more going to be a selling type transfer window. So what's your take on these players? Are they required in the team for the depth, or you think it's wise to sell them off?
I think as far as Nainggolan is concerned, I think I've watched Cagliari quite a few times, and I think without Nainggolan, they are not quite penetrative in the central areas. I think Marco Rogue has still done pretty well, but I think there's quite a lack of midfield penetration in there, and I think that's why they were so desperate to get Nainggolan back in the summer. So I think that should be done, and Inter will still probably get about, even if they let him go on an initial loan deal and then the good old obligation to buy thing, they'll still get a good 5-7, at least a 5-7 million euros out of it. So I think that should be done as soon as possible. And Ericsson, we know Ericsson, he needs to be moved on. Not just, and I think for Ericsson, a lot of people say that it's about his work rate and all of that, but I think it's also down to how things were in lockdown. He didn't quite have a house to live in when lockdown came in Italy. He couldn't quite train, and the situation was pretty poor for him. And I think I think I watched quite a bit of Eriksen at Spurs under Pochettino, and I thought that guy was world class at one point, and it's come to a point where he seems to have lost interest in football. I mean, that's how it looks like every single time I watch him. He looks least interested in playing. He looks miles off how he was under Pochettino. People think he can't press high up the pitch when he was literally one of the best pressers in the Premier League under Pochettino and at Ajax as well. So I think he just seems to have been wanting a place where he can just restart things and where he really is the man on the pitch. Where you look at how interplay, a lot of their service comes down from the wide areas. So I think he needs a club where everything comes through him instead of someone else. He needs to be the star of the team. So I think Inter need to maybe get 15 million out of him and sell him permanently, because he's the sort of player who still is pretty well known, who has a reputation for being maybe who can still, I think, be one of the best in his position at this point. But I think it's for the good of every single party involved. I think he needs to be moved on.
And Parmesh, same question to you. If you had to say, like, which are the two main vital signings who Inter must do in this January Mercato, who would it be?
I mean, I couldn't agree more with Kaustubh. Yeah, first of all, sorry, I couldn't agree more with Kaustubh. So the thing is, for me, before we can sign anyone, it's common sense that we have to move players on. Like, be it Papu Gomez, be it Rodrigo De Paul. First of all, I want Nangolan out. I want Vecino out. Nangolan he doesn't seem to be interested here. Yeah, you saw that training video where he was just half-heartedly training. Just wandering about the training ground. It doesn't seem to care. Like, so it's him who should be moved on. You know, to Kostub's point about how good Ericsson can be, and I've been stressing this to a lot of Inter. You see that he can be the presser Conte wants him to be, but he's just been off it. Yeah, maybe it's as Kostub said. He's maybe lost interest in football or whatever it is. He needs a fresh start. But it has so like as much as I want Ericsson to stay, he has to go. Like his time is up, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, if I had to just pick two players to come in at Inter quickly, I guess in the last few hours I've been reading reports that Inter are the favorites for Papu Gomez. Of course, I don't see him fitting in that 3-5-2 per se, because his role over the seasons, from being an extensive presser of opponents to being more creative, he's been more creative of late. So maybe I don't know, slots in as one of the strikers. I don't know, but whatever it is, if I had to pick one player primarily, it would be Rodrigo De Paul. Without any debates. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. And Kaustubh, going back to you, I think this over the longest, if you check over the last decade, this has been the closest Scudetto race. Normally, it's always at this point where you see Juventus with a massive lead and maybe Napoli trailing slowly behind. This time, the league looks more open. We say that every year that this time is going to be different, but I think Juventus has been winning for the last 9 years. So, how do you see the Scudetto generally as your thoughts? How is it going to be? Is it going to be open, or you think pretty much Juventus will catch up and again race on? What's your take on the league standings this time?
I think it will probably be the closest that we've ever seen. I mean, barring that how Napoli slipped up 2-3 seasons ago, excluding that. I mean, even last season, Inter lost out by, I mean, 1 or 2 points, whatever the margin was. But I think this one will be much more closer, and a lot of it will come down to how Inter do, because they're the only team, as I said, which aren't playing European football. Napoli are playing it, and I think Napoli are one of the favorites for the Europa League, and they'll go pretty far in that. Juventus, I don't think they'll go too far, largely because of how Pirlo's system is. And Atlanta won't go too far, but there will be a point where every single Italian team will be out of European competition, and that's when things will just start to, let's say, get interesting, how they sort of rotate the team around, because all of them will have their regular first team starters in the team. And the most interesting part is every single team that could challenge for the title this season has one demarcated leader in there, which we haven't quite seen before. Like Milan have got Zlatan, Juventus have got Ronaldo, Inter have got Lukaku, and then Napoli, I think, have got 2 or 3 players in there. And I think they are missing Victor Osimhen quite a lot. And so I think it's also because of how many leaders that exist in those teams, that we'll see a much more tighter title race. So yeah, I think Inter for me are the favorites, but Juventus, you never know about them because the number of players they have in there who've done it over the last 9 years or maybe the last 4 or 5 years. I think that's very, very important. I know Conte emphasizes on having a lot of leaders in the team. So I think as soon as Inter lose 2 games, I think that's when Conte will start to flip. I mean, that's when things will start to go awry and things will start to look bleak, and you'll have these phases where um, you feel as if Juventus are going to win it, but Juventus then drop points because I don't think they are as good as they were last season or even before that season. They are much more prone to giving up points this season, and they've got this need to rest Cristiano Ronaldo more. So I think it will be a pretty complicated title race, which is tough to call. But I think for me, Inter are the favorites to do it, and a lot of it is because it's now or never for Conte. Basically, I think he's got his own players in, and he's now put all eggs in one basket, and there's just no running away from the fact that he just has to do it. And if he doesn't do it, it's going to be a massive failure. So he has no choice but to win it.
Also, Kaustubh, just coming back to you quickly, talking about Serie A in general, Serie A has improved the marketability, the players attracting. Now it's Serie A is attracting a lot of world-class talents, not like the previous years. I think because one thing, the downfall of Spanish league with Barcelona and Real Madrid slightly going down, and now more and more players, foreign players, want to play in the Italian league. Also, thanks to the new taxing system, which allows them to earn a lot. So how do you see, like, generally, because you have been closely watching Premier League too, but now you're seeing Italian league slowly coming up back to its original spot where it has been one of the best leagues. Players like Pogba, players like Haaland, Messi also have always linked to Italian league. What's it take generally as a league, the marketability of it?
I think this is probably over the last 2 years, it's probably the first time where I've seen a lot of, let's say, Bundesliga fans or Serie A fans where they look at a player playing in Serie A and they say, "This is a player I want in my team." Because you look at maybe a Chelsea fan or maybe a Tottenham fan, you look at them, and if they need a centre back, they'll go and say that we need Milan Skriniar in my team. When 5 years ago, no one would have said that I want Dodo in my team. That's how things are. I mean, there are players in Serie A who are very much capable of dominating in the other leagues. You look at players like Milinkovic Savic, you look at maybe Luis Alberto, you look at Lukaku, of course. Those sort of players, the number of those players and the quality of those players has increased. And I think the ownership models have also had an impact where we're moving towards a model where we've got more foreign owners than just Italian owners. They see the game in a more from a more of a commercial aspect than a more let's say a regional aspect. They want to make more of a global impact. I mean, it's a bit ironical considering Juventus have Italian owners and they want to do this the most. But um, it's you look at Roma, you look at Inter, they've got all of them have got foreign owners. Parma have now got foreign owners. Fiorentina have got foreign owners. So I think a lot of it comes down to how the owners see it. They want to bring in, let's say, Fiorentina. No one would have imagined that they could have signed Ribery in the summer of 2019, and a lot of it was down to Rocco Comissio's imagination about uh, creating this global fan base for a club that isn't exactly as small as the league table would suggest. So it's just bringing about this new ambition into clubs that may not be as prominent as maybe Juventus or Inter or Milan. I think it's been a more of a they just look at the game from a more global perspective rather than a regional perspective. So I think that's just had a really good impact. And then we're seeing much more coaches be more progressive. You've got Gasparini, you've got Paulo Fonseca coming in. Fonseca was linked with a lot of big clubs in Germany and in England as well. Then Roma got him. I think he's a pretty good coach. And you've got Conte. I know he's not as progressive as a lot of other coaches, but he still has this global appeal where I mean, he's just very, very marketable in a sense that he's very maniacal in his approach, and people absolutely love him for it. So I think it's also about how the methods of football are sort of changing in Italy. It's not like the stereotype that's attached to it, that it's pretty defensive, it's boring, is changing. You look at how Parma play, you look at how Torino play. They play a more possession-based football under their new managers. It's more progressive. It's more like how teams would want to do in Germany, and I think that's the sort of bar that Italy is now trying to reach. And it's, as I said, it's a combination of all the reasons that I just mentioned.
Yeah, Kaustubh, I mean, that's a very interesting and in-depth take, like, I mean, Italy now, Serie A, and I mean, let's say, Serie B to an extent, it's these two leagues I've seen, like, I've watched over the past 2 seasons, and of course, a lot of seasons, they've been really competitive. And as you said, it's the players, how managers have evolved. When you look at AC Milan, they were so close to getting Ralph Rangnick, and, that could have led to another revolution. Maybe they wouldn't have done, or so well immediately, but you know what Rangnick brings to the table, yeah. But of course, Pioli is doing a good job. Credit to him. But as you said, Parma getting foreign owners. Rocco Camiso wants to build that new stadium. He really wants to work for Fiorentina. Unfortunately, maybe if he could hire a better coach, things could go down a different path. But yeah, Serie A as a whole has been changing. So, and for the better, and I guess I hope it, that the trend continues for years to come. But yeah, of course, Kosto, moving on to things, to the thick of things, to conclude the podcast on the last few notes, I want to quickly get your top six and your bottom three, starting from the bottom three of the table.
I mean, for me, Crotone and Spezia are pretty much uh, meant to be the bottom two, because I've not seen enough of them. I think Crotone have sort of shown shades of being a very good counter-attacking team, but a lot of times, especially in the big games, they've just lacked this final pass. Spezia, I mean, they are sort of overperforming by numbers, so I think there will be a point in the season where they'll go back to their mean, they'll regress to their mean, and they'll probably be in that bottom three. I'm not quite sure about the third team, but I think the decision that Genoa have taken today, I think that sort of seals it for them. Because the other teams, you look at the other teams in there, you look at Fiorentina, you look at Torino, I think those teams they are too good to go down. I mean, it's a cliche, but you've got more of those coaching issues there, and coaching issues can be gotten rid of by sacking a manager. I know Fiorentina are experts at sacking managers. They don't know how to manage coaches. But those two teams, they are pretty much good enough to maybe challenge for Europe, or maybe finish bang mid-table. They are not meant to be relegated. It takes a simple managerial change to fix that issue. But for Genoa, they've gone out, changed the manager, and I don't think it's gonna work out for too long. A bit similar to what maybe Brescia did last season, changed the manager twice or thrice, brought the same manager back in. Genoa might just go down the same path, and their squad's been a bit bland as well. So I think that will be the bottom three, and Fiorentina and Torino will survive. Parma will survive, largely because of the fact that they've got better squads. And going to the top six, I mean, I want to see Inter win it, and I think, I don't know if they'll win it or not, but I'll say Inter finishing top. I'm still not completely sold on Milan. I mean, I'm pretty liking what I'm seeing from them, but in Serie A, you don't really know which team really will finish at the top unless Juventus start playing well or Inter start playing well. So we're slowly reaching a point of the season when Inter and Juventus are starting to build a lot of momentum, and Milan, perhaps at the wrong time, have a lot of players missing and players that are very important to them. So I think this may be the next 1 month. I mean, I can be wrong. I can be proved wrong, and I'll be happy to be proved wrong. But I think this 1 month will be the period when fixtures come thick and fast. I mean, Milan rely on about one spine of players, 4 or 5 players, and once they start to lose them, that's when they'll drop off to maybe second or third. So I expect Juventus to be finishing second and Milan third. And I think Napoli are pretty much nailed on for a European place at the fourth place. I think Roma have been pretty good, but they are very, very inconsistent. And I like what I see from them on a regular basis, but it's in the big games where they really struggle to make a mark. I mean, it's quite the same as the case with Napoli, but I think Napoli, as soon as Osimhen comes back into the first team, I think that's when Napoli will see the best of Napoli, because when Osimhen was playing early in the season, I mean, he was probably one of my favorite players in Europe, the way he played and the way he did just about every single job on the pitch. So I think that's the top four. And for the fifth and sixth, I think I've got Roma and Atlanta there, largely because I think Lazio have, as I said, for I think Spezia, that Lazio have regressed to their mean. I think they are a team that finishes seventh or maybe maximum sixth. And last season was an overperformance for me, considering the number of penalties they got and the number of times they had to come back from losing positions. And I think I remember them playing Fiorentina twice, and both the times I think they got penalties and goals that shouldn't have been goals. So I think a lot of things went their way last season, which you can't always do every single season. So I think Lazio finishing seventh, and then Atlanta and Roma finishing fifth and sixth and playing in the Europa League.
So yeah, that's a pretty interesting prediction, Kaustubh. And just to quickly cap it off, of course, since we have a time limit on the video, unfortunately, we'd love to go on more and more. But quickly, I want, uh, of course, the scoreline prediction for Hellas Verona Inter and possible goal scorers. And once Kaustubh, you're done, we can have Manish's predictions.
I think Verona will score first, as I said, as Torino did, or maybe Cagliari did. They'll nick one from somewhere. Maybe Barak will score one goal. He's scoring a lot of unlikely goals. I think he'll score first. And then Inter will come back, score 3 goals. Maybe Lukaku, obviously, contributing to all of them in some ways. But I think if Hakimi starts, Hakimi is going to contribute. So I think that's how the game will go.
Manish, what about you?
So yeah, something similar lines I'll go with. I'm expecting a 1-1 draw, or maybe a 2-1 victory for us late in the game, where Hakimi assists or he passes on to Lukaku for the winner. So like my prediction would be 1-1 draw, or second option is Inter to come back really, really late in the game and take it down all 3 points.
Those were interesting predictions. And if quickly I had to make a prediction, I mean, I see this being a really tough game, and maybe I guess Hellas Verona will be solid. We'll probably face it tough to break them down, and probably nick a 1-0 win. Maybe Lukaku scoring the winner. I'd be fine with anyone scoring the winner, to be frank, if that's the case. But yeah, I mean, Kaustubh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. You know, of course you have a busy schedule and all, and it's late here. It's like what, like 12:30 now a.m. But thank you so much for coming on. It was really great to have you, and we had an excellent chat. About Inter, all things Serie A, Hellas Verona. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much, man.
Nah, I really enjoyed it as well. I mean, I can go on for as long as I want, but I think largely because of the time we've got to wrap up. But I really enjoyed coming on, and hopefully I can come on later as well.
Yeah, we definitely want to have you for more podcasts in the future as well. This isn't the last one. So thank you so much. So folks, be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. It's the Solo Inter Podcast. We are available on audio platforms like Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, everywhere else. Of course, we'll be leaving Kaustubh's Twitter handle in the description below. So be sure to check his work out. His articles on Football Italia are amazing. His work for, of course, Get Football Italian News as well. You should, of course, give his work a read. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And thank you.